not seriously. It means that you were born and children, can you listen to the TV? And I'm like, yes, because there's no other knowledge. But the secretary to do this any type of background.
Good evening. I'm glad everybody's here this evening. We have a presentation on the Nettles Park Expansion Master Plan, the conceptual plans from Kimley Horn. We're going to just turn it right over. We will introduce ourselves very quickly so you'll know who you're speaking to, and I'll go to my far left first.
John Duckworth, City Council, First Citizens Bank.
Fred McGuire, retired professor at Puritan.
Alicia Smith, Executive Director for Equity Compliance, Title 9 Coordinator at Clemson University, City Council.
And I should have introduced myself, Robert Halfigger, work for Park National Bank.
John Fulmer, retired.
And then you already met Andy. You know Beverly, Rick, and then Jay if you wanted to say anything. So, all right, good. We're going to just turn it over to you guys to start the presentation if that works.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
You'll hop up here?
that's right. Yes. That's perfect.
Perfect. I'll make a quick introduction of our team too. From Kimley Horn, I'm Brandon White. I'm the project manager, senior landscape architect, and I have Nick Kuhn, who's one of our park planners and a landscape architect as well. Kaylee Gill, who works with us as well, and then we have from Studio Maine, Blake Sanders, who's a partner with us as well on this project. So thank you for your time this evening. We really appreciate the opportunity to have a work session, and we're going to go through a short presentation. Nick's going to take the lead on, and we really want to reserve as much time as we can to really just have dialogue through this. You'll see, and you've got an advanced package, hopefully most of you downloaded. You'll see that here in the presentation, and then as you can see in the room, we've got some boards and easels here that you're welcome to. Once we kind of start talking, we can walk up and point to, and even if we draw on them, that's fine. They're here for the purpose of coming to some conclusions here, and at the close of this, we'll ask the council here for some actions, some recommendations on where we go from here, basically. So I'll turn this over to Nick. Thanks.
Right. Good evening. Yes, as Brandon noted, we've got a couple items that are sitting in front of you here this evening. A couple big packets. We have the printout of the presentation that we'll be going through tonight, and we'll show some plans in there, and I know it could be a little hard to see some of those on the monitors and that, and so we can, at any time, feel free to jump up and take a look at some of the boards and a little closer to that, or you can see we have some 11 by 17 printouts as well, so you can see a little bit more detail. We also have a packet of information here from that summarizes the public engagement that we've had to date on the process here. We still have some more to go. But this is a nice summary of all those events that we've had, both engagement online and other virtual events that we've had to date. So we'll highlight some of that. And then I did hear a number of folks affiliated with banks in this, and so I know you might be interested in the breakdown of the cost estimates and phasing elements there. So you can, for both the concepts that we'll be talking about tonight, we have the cost estimate broken down by recommended phases, and that gives a starting point for discussion, so you can see sort of drill down on a line item for some of the costs in that, so we can have those discussions. So that is information for your reference this evening, and with that, we can dive into the presentation part. Feel free if there's any questions along the way. We keep this informal. We'll present, and then again, as Brandon, we want to reserve the time for discussion at the end, because we're really here as part of our second phase of engagement. This is to really kind of report back to you all what we heard from our second public involvement workshop online, and also meeting in April with the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee and their input along this process. So we'll present that to you, and then input from tonight really helps as a capstone of that for this phase of the project. So this evening we'll dive into with the presentation. Really, these first three parts are part of the presentation, and item 4, the input session here today, is really what we'll spend some time on. So with that, Our real focus here is to look at the expansion area for Nettles Park. And so just to kind of start with on the base here, the areas that we're talking about, this is really a unique opportunity to be able to have such a large contiguous piece of property really added into the city's park system. It's even better that it's located adjacent to a significant existing park. And so to have that opportunity is a wonderful one. We also wanted to note that the expansion area really almost wraps around a good portion of the existing Niles Park. So that is an important part of making sure that the existing portion of Niles and the expansion area really go cohesively together. And that requires we'll look at both what's working and what doesn't work in the existing part of the park, what are the issues and challenges there, and can the expansion help to address some of those items. So some of the improvements you'll see on these concepts help address those elements in the existing portion of the park. So the process that we've done for this project to develop a master plan is four-part. We've started the phase one back in August of 2020, and that really started with our data collection. And so we were collecting our information, both GIS, aerials. We also went out to the site with staff, and I'm sure many of you have had the VIP tour, gator tour around the expansion area. Those wonderful cleared paths to get around, to really take in the site and understand what the unique elements, both physically, but also what are those elements that really highlight the essence of that expansion area, what draws out those unique elements for that. So that started in August and concluded in October, just in time to launch phase two, which was our initial public engagement. And that consisted of a virtual online presentation workshop, as well as a series of focus groups with various stakeholders to really gather that initial idea of what were some of the needs within the community, what was working with the existing Niles Park, what are some of those challenges. And that started the groundwork for the public engagement. Shortly after that initial phase, then we launched into phase three, the master plan development. And that started in December of last year and is carrying us through June. This has really been the process for the last 6 months. It's been focused on developing those ideas into kind of putting pen to paper, those ideas to a conceptual set of plans, and presenting those and getting feedback over the last few months. After this phase, we'll move into phase four, which is the master plan review and approval. And so the input tonight will help really cap that and be able to move into that final phase. And we're targeting August, so late summer, for a final master plan presentation, both with an in-person public workshop, and then as well as a presentation to Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, and then back to you all for a final presentation of those master plans and recommendations. So again, the schedule of the process here, we have a little blue arrow that points where we are this evening. You can see there's other opportunities that are out there in the future. So we're targeting July 21st time frame for the public in-person meeting, which will be our first in-person meeting with the public for this project. But we wanted to make sure if we could safely accomplish that within the time frame of the project. That was a great milestone to still gather input from the public on the master plan. The park evaluation, again, started in August. Nice warm period to get out on the site. We trekked quite a bit, a couple miles across the site, really looking at all those unique opportunities here. And these are just some collections of those photos of the site. So we have a great collection here. We're acquainted to the park, the expansion area. And this allowed us to really pull together through an analysis of that data and the site evaluation into an opportunities and constraints diagram. So I don't intend you guys to read everything on the screen right here. You have a 11 by 17 printout of this if you like to look at all the items here. But this is really looking at those sort of layers that create unique aspects to the park. And so high points, low points, topography, hydrology, vegetation, really looking at where those elements are. And this helps us identify where in the site might lend to opportunities for development, what other areas might be best for preservation, unique opportunities that we'd like to highlight, and connection points is another area, both internal circulation as well as external egress and ingress into the site as well as part of that. Our second phase was really launched with phase 2 of the project with the public engagement, and this is to help us identifying the needs for the project. So this is an expansion to really look at a way to engage the public, and so we had quite an exciting 2020 being able to engage the public. But I'd like to say we had a lot of success both for the project website and surveys. We had a lot of input through this process, and so you can see some of the call-outs here, and if you have your smartphone, you can scan the QR code and it'll take you to the project website if you haven't been. But we keep that updated, as well as we post all of our presentations. We have videos plus the presentation itself, all available for download on the website. And you can see those have been downloaded over 230 times. We've also had almost 1,800 unique visitors to the website, and they've come back repeatedly. So we have almost over 5,600 visits to the site. So folks are coming back at multiple times to contribute into the process here. We also had a survey during the November initial public engagement, where we were asking folks what are their desires and priorities for Nettles Parks in terms of facilities and potential development of the site. There's active elements or passive elements. And so I'll show some of those results, but we had over 530 respondents to that survey alone. So great input through this process, and that has been really a cornerstone that helped inform this. We also, as part of that website, have a interactive map feature that's on there, and this really allowed folks to go on and we posted some of those photos from when we were out on the site evaluating it, so folks could see those unique areas and click on those on the map and learn more about the site. But they were also able to contribute ideas. And so we had a lot of great thoughts that went into different areas of the site. If you squint a little bit, you can see a clustering of some red dots, and it's around the dog park, the existing dog park area. You guys are probably familiar with some of those comments in terms of the dog park. But we had a lot of comments throughout the site, both in the existing areas and the expansion areas that helped in informing those ideas. In this case, we also wanted to highlight some of those survey results through here. So we had, again, a high level of participation in the survey. And so I wanted to report back on some of those highlights here. And so some of the key findings, again, we had 534 respondents on the survey asking what were the most important facility that they would recommend. So we had a question that asked, what did you desire? And so people could select as many amenities as they like, different types, even write in options. But we also want to understand, we might not be able to provide everything that everybody wants. So we asked the question, if you had one thing, what was the most important facility that you would like to see out at Nettles Park with the expansion areas? And so we asked that, and we had a very high turnout and participation with the online survey with the youth population. And we were able to actually track that where people were accessing it as the link was passed around on Instagram, and so we had a lot of great participation. So you'll see the highest votes were for skate park. And so we acknowledge that was a little bit of a game of the system. It was certainly, this is not a statistical survey, but it was open for anybody to vote. And we were able to track that. Actually, we had some duplications from certain IP addresses, so we eliminated those. But we had, in this case, 121 unique participants vote for a skate park as the most important item that they would like to have at Nettles Park. But you can also see then the highlight of some of these other elements. So there was a high support for athletics in those top. We had pickleball courts, But we also had hiking and walking as some of those that were in the very top. There's also was noted a desire to have an outdoor for aquatics components. And I know that's something that's actually been recent events with the addition of the pool, and we'll address the aquatics component here in just a little bit. So we had this online survey. We also, again, had a series of focus groups with stakeholders. And we had 18 participants, and part of that packet of information, about 50 pages, we took down notes, we listened to every comment, and we also looked at what was being mentioned by stakeholders in those focus groups. And so when we were noting certain facilities or certain needs, we were adding those together, really to see what was bubbling to the top there. And so this chart identifies what the focus group participants were identifying as the highest needs. And so those were more of those passive type uses, so a little bit different than what we had from the online engagement. So we had unpaved trails, we had a gathering structure, sort of a large pavilion or space that could have events. We also had parking. Parking started to establish as a additional need, connections to existing trails, and also the dog park started to bubble. So those were just some of those top mentioned ones. But there was a little bit less emphasis in the focus groups in terms of the activities and the recreation programs. But trails were again mentioned many times as some of those top needs. And then lastly, I'd also highlight from the online mapping that we had, so those comments and ideas that were posted online, people were able to post ideas, and then others were able to come in and either like it or dislike it, sort of social media aspect. So we mapped out here how many times a facility type was mentioned or liked. That's shown in the green bars. And then how many times it was disliked is shown in sort of orange bar next to it. And you can see, in this case, dog parks was mentioned the most. But again, followed by some of those elements that's a mix of passive and active recreation plans. So unpaved trails as well as walking trails, skate park, and bike trails were some of those that were top mentions. And water-based activities were also included here. So splash pad was mentioned quite a bit in those. So those start to, again, layer on. Each one of these techniques is not sufficient in itself, but we wanted to make sure that we were gauging ideas and needs from the community at large in various means and techniques.
Excuse me, can I ask a question? Just before I don't forget, could you talk a little bit about the demographics of these focus groups? And do you have that information?
I do have the demographics of the focus groups. I do have it for the online surveys. So the focus groups had about 18 participants, and there were many stakeholders within the communities. Those folks that were engaged in or were familiar with Nettles Park in some way, either actively through participation in programs or with the Parks Department in general. And so the online survey was, I think, a better demographic mix of the community. We had all age groups participate within the online survey, and actually, we had a significant amount of youth participate in the survey mix of that.
How about diversity-wise? I'm thinking from a ethnicity, race ethnicity perspective.
We didn't specifically ask demographic characteristics of participants.
But was your sense, though, as I asked some questions, that the groups you talked to were representative of the community, gender, race, ethnicity, where they lived in the city, length of time they've been here? So could you disaggregate this data for us, or you don't have those contacts?
And we didn't ask those questions, given that this was not meant to be a statistical survey to really gauge that those elements. We did ask households for the age breakdown in groups, as well as whether the household had any children within. And so we had actually about 50-50 split on participants with households with children, and we have a breakdown of different age groups of those children versus households with non-children.
Did you ask? I'm not a big favor, I don't like survey research, because it really is big and low responsibility. But did you have a sense of what involvement these folks already had with parks? Were they already using parks? Were they close to other parks? Or were these generally people that not been using the parks and they view this as a major place? Or what? It would help, I guess, maybe not tonight, to give us some profile and at least a sense. I'll give you an example off the top of my head. I think 8% of our population are Asian Americans. Any Asian Americans in any of your presentations, as far as you know?
Again, we did not track the demographics of the individual participants on here, so I fortunately don't have that information. But we do have, I would say with a large amount of participation on the website, again, almost 1,800 unique users, likely to have a high mix. But again, because this was more of a user-based survey, this was one where it is probably highly reflective of those that are active participants of parks system and supporters of the park system. So it would be, the results would be, statistical basis, it would be more biased towards the idea of support for the parks.
And how did you distribute the surveys?
The survey was administered on the project's website and is available for anybody that would like to complete the survey. So it's both open for residents and non-residents too. It was also distributed, the link was broadcast across the social media accounts for the city. And then we also, any participants that had registered on the project website or had participated in any of the workshops or focus groups that were also emailed notification to help participate in the surveys as well.
Thank you.
And then just one more item on this online survey. This is one of the questions that we asked in terms of do you support the park being more active, or program uses are more passive or at-will recreation types. And this was, you can see in the red coloring, the largest contingency of respondents, majority selected to have a balance of passive and active uses for the Nettles Park, and about an equal amount selecting either active or passive. And so with that idea of balancing both passive and active uses aside, it's important to acknowledge that existing Nettles Park is fairly programmed, a fairly active space. So that would really lend towards a good amount of the existing or the expansion area kind of being reserved for that passive use to provide or balance that out with the overall park space. Some of the other information that was helping inform the development of the program for the site, we wanted to see what the trends were telling us, both locally, nationally, and so we were looking at program and activity registrations for athletics and programs here. This is for the city of Clemson, and this is looking back several years to see what were the trends were, and this was an effort to identify if there was a need for additional athletics, and if so, through the site evaluation, whether Nettles Park would be the appropriate location for those. It's important to know we averaged out we compiled the percent change over a 3-year period from 2017 to 2019. The data from 2020 and 2021 obviously were impacted by COVID, so it's a little bit incomplete, but we wanted to still show that what the programs had for those years. You can see that the programs almost all have a range of increase here, and particularly soccer and volleyball have had some very high increases over a period of time. So this is an element that again helped engage some of the discussions with staff and with the participants about what kind of program could be used, and also recognition that, as you can see with some of the later years, the city has added additional seasons to some of these leagues. So fall soccer has been one of the more popular programs for many years and also had significant growth. There's also been an addition of spring soccer, so we're adding even more usage to some of the existing fields. And as we talked with staff and toured the existing Nettles Park areas, we also noted that does start to make it rather difficult to, and impacts some of the reduced times available for practice and also resting the existing fields. So the quality of the fields can be really impacted by adding more and more onto those uses. So those were some of the local trends. We wanted to see what that looked like, again, to national trends here. So we're looking at sort of the Sports and Fitness Industry Association's surveys of participation levels, both for a range of different types of activities, both individual sports, team sports. You notice it almost tells a different story from what we were seeing with the trends here in Clemson. You can see the team sports category on the right side. You'll see a lot of orange in there. Those are decreases in there in terms of team sports, and that is something that we've noticed over the last year and over the last 5 years nationally. Is a drop in participation with team sports and a growth with individual sports. That is not necessarily the trends that we're witnessing here in Clemson. That we're seeing as the community grows, and the history of athletics here in the community, as well as our wonderful weather, all lend towards a higher level of athletics, both with individual and team sports here. So we wanted to be aware of where we fell within sort of the benchmarking, both what's with the national trends as well as what's happening here locally in Clemson.
Real quick, and this is a question again for Jay. I'd like to go back in and look at that data again and see how do a check on our growth in participation. How many of those participants are outside the city of Clemson? Outside of city of Clemson residents for every single season across those same years. Yeah, because again, I think we've experienced a little bit. We're the last program standing to a certain extent, as some of the smaller programs around us have. We've absorbed that impact, and that's something that we need to know from a pricing philosophy standpoint and those kind of things. I'm not saying that we aren't happy to have that, but at the same time, our growth might be because others have died, not because there's additional new Clemson residents participating in our program.
And the quality of the facilities too. It's definitely the quality is very high here, and so that may draw folks from surrounding communities into the area. We also looked at Camp Clemson registration as well. That was another part of looking at opportunities at Nettles. And so we looked at Camp Clemson has been a very popular program that has weird a lot of support through focus groups and through public input towards the camp itself. And right now it's hosted at Edwards Middle School, and it does have some, it sort of lacks the designated space to really, I think, be able to function the way that it may have the opportunity to. And it's also had a 10% increase prior to COVID in growth to that, and it's really actually capped by the space limitations, more so in 2021 than ever before. That you'll see a significant drop in both the enrolled and the maximum number of weekly participants in there, and a big increase of the wait list to that. So we explored the opportunities of, if that is, Nettles Park could host Camp Clemson itself, and actually allow maybe the program to even expand to meet some of those needs for the waitlisted participants there. So through that process, we compiled, again, a big packet of information, and we really sort of whittled down. This is really to see what was bubbling to the top, again, across all those different techniques, to see what those needs were. And so this list is from highest, or most desired, highest need, starting with number one and dropping down in descending order. You'll see number one is paved or unpaved trails. That was mentioned repeatedly. You'll also see pickleball, dog park improvements or relocation. You'll see a lot of those passive sort of activities, and that lends again back to the idea of desire by many participants to have a balance at Nettles Park with those kind of passive and active uses. But you'll see, again, improved vehicle circulation and parking was another item within the park that we looked at and came out through that engagement process. A little feedback here. So what we did with this list, again, this is just a capture of the top 12. We wanted to see if, as we started to look at concepts, if these activities could fit within the site, if there's opportunity to provide these, and that'd be a long-range vision, a long-range goal. And that really ties back to the idea of having Nellis Park really almost evolve into that family-oriented park that can really serve that destination for a half day or full day of activity for a family. So the concepts that were developed have the same program. And what we'll see is some variations of where those kind of function and fit within one another.
Can I ask, just before we get away from the survey, just to go back to the question, and this is the professional opinion. So is your opinion that this survey, the focus groups, the responses are representative of the city? I'm looking, so 8% of the city is Asian. This is an example I said before, but when you've done this, I've never done this. Do you feel confident saying to us that these data represent the city and the people in the city? Or is this, it's always a survey research, right? Or is this just an artifact of the 10% who chose to respond that doesn't really help us much understand what the community wants?
No, I think it really does. What we saw, the responses coming out are, again, tie into some of the trends that we have seen both regionally as well as nationally with the growing aspect of the desire to have more passive recreation. So those are within what we would expect to see for results both of the survey for that. There's the opportunity. One thing that was potentially lacking here was the city's Parks and Recreation master plan itself is a little bit older. And so we did not rely upon that information because that info is usually good for about 3 or 5 years. And so what we were going forward with was the idea of developing concepts or recommendations that were also flexible for the future. So when the Parks Master Plan may have an opportunity to be updated, or there's other sources of information that can be added in, that this master plan ultimately can respond to that. And so recommendations, and I'll show you a criteria of what we used for how we developed phasing recommendations, was that the top priorities that we were hearing that would be consistent with what we would hear anytime we do a survey within the community, you would see a pretty consistent top 5 elements. And that if we progress with that as a phase 1, we can feel very sure about those. Now, items number 15 through 20 on the list, those are maybe longer term, and we can get a better gauge of from the full community if those actually are priorities at a later time. And if they're not, they don't have to necessarily move forward at Nellis Park. It may be results may point in a need in a different direction. So the master plan can be flexible to address that down the road. It's a long-term vision. Any other questions in regards to the survey or the engagement process? And there's in that packet of information, it's like 50 pages, so there's a lot in there. But if you have any questions as you thumb through it, you can certainly come back at any time. So we wanted to go through the concepts here and just introduce those again. As we go through, if you feel free, you can, at any time, you can jump up, take a closer look at the boards or at the 11 by 17s here. So we developed a series of concepts and phasing recommendations and developed cost estimates so we get an idea of what those impacts could be when we're talking about that. But we had a pretty extensive process with how to develop those phasing recommendations. And so we have a criteria here that in sort of descending order of what we were sort of weighted, what we were taking into consideration with that phasing. And so looking at the identified community needs and desire, that was really a big driver. The site constraints and preparation needs were a big consideration. Infrastructure needs was also a very important aspect. We want to make sure that when we're sequencing, phasing, that we're not necessarily going back to an area that was just developed and having to run utilities or new elements through that. And so that was a consideration. We're also looking at staff input. So we gauge folks at the Parks Department, what they knew about the site, what worked, what were the issues. We also, again, looked at complementary elements. So this was going back to that idea of having Nellis Park as a family-oriented park. So what sort of amenities complemented one another to really serve all various age groups and abilities at the park. We also looked at revenue generation as an aspect. What were types of facilities that could be potentially high priority and also have revenue generation that could help fund future additions to the park. And then considerations towards duplication facilities, looking at what was being offered at other parks, what was being considered at other parks, so that Nellis Park isn't duplicating elements here. Operations and maintenance costs considerations, and as well as, again, tying back to the family-oriented activities. So on the right side, we have a little example here of both the duplicate and complementary facilities. So I mentioned we'd come back to the aquatics component. That was one that came up in a couple of the results as a fairly high desire. It wasn't necessarily, when we asked as the most important facility, it wasn't ranked very high, but we wanted to make sure we circled back around. This was some discussion in some of the public meetings, was the idea of aquatics being available within the community. It's a very high cost type of facility. We have existing indoor facilities that are available. We also really are lacking adjacent partners that would probably serve for that in terms of having either a community facility, other types of community facilities, or schools that are located adjacent to Nellis Park that could also utilize that facility and have quick access to it. So Nellis Park may not be the best location for meeting if there is a increased need for aquatics in the site, but we'll also highlight in the concepts we wanted to provide flexibility. Maybe 10 years, 20 years down the road, there is a need for aquatics, and we wanted to plan that there could be space within that if that's needed. So there's flexibility built into that consideration. The other was complementary facilities, and so those were some of the more adventure-based sports and activities: disc golf, ropes course, skate parks. These were also noted as lower priorities, but they were also represented that they served population groups that noted repeatedly there wasn't a lot across Clemson to really serve these groups. And then Nettles Park would be a great location for that, and it complements that family-oriented activity base as well, that everybody within various age groups could participate in activities at Nettles. So those were found to be complementary, again, lower priority, so they were included in later phases. And so those were, again, prioritized out a little bit further versus items that were higher priority from the community. So the first concept I wanted to show here was what we call Concept A. We didn't get fancy with the names, so Concept A and Concept B, but we just highlighted a few items here. This Concept A is noted as having the most new athletic facilities. And I said that the real difference here in terms of the program, again, because the site is mostly the same program across the two concepts. Concept A included one more baseball field included in here. So that was the addition of having the most new athletic fields was one additional baseball field versus Concept B. It also has the most parking worked into the desire here, and this could be on a gauge of how much parking could fit inside if it's used for larger events or potential tournaments out at the facility as well. But because of that little bit more robust development program, it also has the most mass grading and use of retaining walls across the site, because there's about 90 feet of relief across the site. So it would require some mass grading, and those are certainly associated with a slightly higher cost to those activities. And so therefore it would take the longest amount of time to really phase in some of those top priority needs. You have a breakdown of the costs in the packet here, but this is what breaks down into our recommended phases, and we'll certainly spend some time this evening talking about the phases, but how those phases broke down in terms of percentage of the overall cost. So phase 1 was about 35% of the overall cost. We had a phase 1B. We wanted to, there were certain activities, certain facilities that was very highly ranked or prioritized by the community, but might have other partners or other ways to fund. So we identified that as a 1B sort of alternate, but those are very closely associated with the phase 1 recommended facilities. Phase 2 in the blue column represented about 48% of the overall cost, and then phase 3 in green is the lowest cost at 7%. It's really some of the final priorities within the site, and those are longer term potentials there. So we have a series of diagrams, and we have a board that shows these as well. I'll go through fairly quickly. You can reference. There's a list associated with each of these phases, what would ultimately be involved in this. But what we're looking to do here is take advantage of, again, that criteria for phasing. The areas shown in the color is what would be involved with that phase or be developed during that phase. So the orange shaded areas, which are mostly the western areas of the site around the existing Meadows Park facilities. And this would include a number of the athletic components, as well as towards the eastern side to the high point of the existing the expansion areas to have an indoor and outdoor event space. And so this would be potentially a community gathering spot that was highly ranked in priorities, as well as a potential revenue generation facilities, as well as the athletic fields being revenue generators itself. We also included a number of, again, parking and also trail and hiking facilities in phase 1. So this is really intended to capture as many of those top priority needs within a phase 1 for the development of the park. Phase 2 is a little bit lower cost from phase 1. It included some of those other elements that might be some partners or alternate funding sources that could help fund some of these. And this included some additional field lighting, splash padding, as well as connections and tie-ins to the Green Crescent Trail and shown in here. So those are highlighted in sort of yellow color on the maps. Then phase 2 was the primary, the additional baseball fields and central parking areas, as well as the day camp facilities in here, and the adventure sports. And you can see that area is largely on the eastern side of the park. I think it would be developed on its own and not have to disturb what is currently would be developed on the western side of the park. And so utilities would already be across the western side and be able to tie into this expansion area for phase 2. And the final phase 3, again, would be some of those lower priority items that would add to that overall family-oriented and multi-age group offerings, with the additional pavilions, skate park, a paved pump track, additional lighting for fields, and then also additional unpaved trails and activations of those areas that are for passive uses. Then we would go over what we call Concept B. Concept B, here was a little bit different. Again, roughly the same program. It had one less baseball field. It also had less parking associated with it. But it also had an important feature that we looked at, and so the internal loop road that would connect all the destinations within the park, and also help out with the operations and maintenance of the park too, allowing that internal circulation to flow, so you don't have to go out back to Central or out to Porter Road to access. And so each of the concepts also added a series of additional access points to the park, including an additional second entrance off Central Road, as well as a third entrance off Porter Road. So that really would allow for that influx of traffic during peak uses to flow. This is really an opportunity. I'll dive into a little bit of the character of this concept and what goes into it. The high point of existing, or the expansion area is again reserved for the event space. And this is really meant to be a facility that could have multiple uses, both as a rental facility, but also we included it as part of phase one so that it could also serve as the base for the Clemson camp. And that could serve so a multi-purpose sort of indoor space that's adjacent to an outdoor event space that could also function as festivals or concerts or other events outside, and have an outdoor space that is at the high point and actually looks out over Patrick Square out towards the mountains. It has a wonderful view out there, so we wanted to make sure that that was reserved for that grand sort of public space. And then we, just to the east of that, shown in the sort of red area, that would be a later phase where permanent day camp facilities and their own facilities could be developed along with some of the adventure sport activities. And that really lends towards the topography and the existing vegetation of the site very well, creating those, then taking those opportunities to highlight those, the natural features of the site. We also moved relocated the dog park closer to the Porter Road entrance, and we're essentially located within the park. So it's a close tie-in to an entrance, and it's would be a popular destination within the site. And we, in this case, you'll notice all the athletic fields are more on the western side of the site. So this is a concept that really developed where sort of inside that loop road is the active recreation elements of the park, and then almost to the outside of that loop road then are the passive uses. And so the existing or proposed ball fields would really ring the existing baseball fields, softball fields, so that they could tie into some of that same infrastructure, utilize the parking lots, and really have that multiple benefits with some of those infrastructures. In the breakdown of the costs here by phase, we broke it down to the same 3 different phases. This is a lower cost concept, mainly because this allowed for a reduction in the amount of grading and retaining walls needed. And so this really worked this concept more with the topography of the site, and allowed again to have that tied in more with the horizontal uses of the athletic fields, where the site was more conducive to that on the western side. So we were able to actually accomplish a lot more with fitting in a little bit more of the phase 1 development. So that's roughly 60% of the cost of the overall project. Almost all of the park elements, the priority elements, are essentially accomplished in that first wave. So that really was the highlight of this, was to see the other phases could eventually be longer term, developed at a later time, but had lower priority needs to them. So you almost have the entire park at about 60% of the cost. And this concept is already less expensive than concept A to begin with. With that, so you'll see the highlight areas of phase 1 shown in the orange. So you see everything within that loop road internally would be developed, except for the additional baseball field. We'd have additional softball fields, parking, sports courts, as well as the indoor and outdoor event space, dog park. These would all be developed, so you'd have a lot of use and really activate almost the entire expansion area. So you'd have an almost entire park there, phase 1. Phase 1B is the same as the previous concept, with the splashback components and ties to the Green Crescent Trail. Phase 2 would be the addition of the baseball field, as well as the permanent day camp facilities and adventure sports, and additional trails and hiking opportunities on the eastern side of the park itself. You'll see additional 1.5 miles of paved trails and over 2 more miles of additional unpaved trails across the eastern portion of the site. And then the phase 3 is the same as the previous concept, with those lower priority amenities as that later phase. So between the 2 concepts we've developed here, there are some highlights associated with each one. Concept A is the higher overall cost, but but it has a lower potential phase one costs associated with it. It has the largest development footprint. It also has the most new athletic fields and the most additional parking offered with it. It would require more mass grading and retaining walls across it, and would have also the longest potential phasing period to get to some of those priority needs at later phases. Concept B has the lower overall cost, but higher initial phase one costs. It includes space for future needs, so that these areas that are outside the loop area could also still be developed for future needs. It has a concentration of the athletic facilities to the inside of the loop on the western side. And it also has the largest area for the passive uses, really reserving that whole eastern, almost half of the expansion area for passive activities. And it has the internal loop road that really connects all those destinations to itself. So we presented these concepts in April through a virtual public workshop, as well as to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. We had a number of comments here noted from the public engagement virtual site here that these are just some of the concept highlights and ideas that were brought up in terms of really having sort of integration of transportation, maybe having a cat bus stop worked into the site. Consider microphasing. This is something where the idea of maybe generating interest in the project and support with early projects could be a consideration. And then you'll see the support and comments in regards to some of the specific activities in terms of disc golf and unpaved trails in here. Then I wanted to highlight some of the results. We asked a series of poll questions during that public workshop online. And so we asked folks, after we presented the concepts here, which concept do you like most? 77% of respondents supported option B, whereas 9% support option A. We also asked participants, does the recommended phasing for the concept that you support reflect your priorities? This area you can see we had about 52% say yes, 38% say no. I'll come back to that in just a second. Final poll question was, do you support moving forward with the final plan? And this would be the one to support. And we had overwhelming support, 77% saying yes, move forward with the final plan development. So what we took away from this was we're on track with public input to provide those and addressing these needs. But what we need to revisit is really the phasing elements to make sure that we're hitting those needs up front. So that's where that 52% support, a little bit less than what we had for the overall concepts to move forward, was really centered on was to revisit that phasing. And so that's why we wanted to make sure we came here tonight to get your all input into those ideas, both for the concepts and for moving forward with phasing recommendations for what might be included in those. So we can fine-tune that and make sure that the plan that is developed for Nettles Park is reflective as a realistic, implementable plan for the city. So with that, I wanted to leave it up on a couple action items here for tonight. And so the discussion period can really start. We're open, but we would like to see if we can accomplish a few things here this evening in terms of collecting your comments or input on concepts. If there, I have a couple prompt kind of questions here. Do you like concept A or B? Do you feel that those reflect the community's needs? Are there any adjustments that you would like to see incorporated in those concepts? If we'd like to move forward with a plan, the public has indicated they'd like to see that progress forward. And we might be able to move forward either with one of these concepts or hybrid. We'd like to get your input on that. And then the other questions in regards to the phasing aspects. Do you support phasing recommendations? Are there any adjustments that are needed that we need to include or incorporate into those phasing? Do you have any input in the priorities of those that you feel are reflective from what you hear from the community? And then in terms of phase one, specifically the budgeting and scheduling for that, we'd like to get your input in in terms of what would be a realistic approach forward to make sure that phase one is something that can really gather the support of the community, reflect the community's needs, but also reflect that there's this great opportunity with this additional acreage at Nettles Park to really accomplish and set the pace for the expansion of Nettles Park on a good start there. So those are our goals or some actions for this evening. On the right side are our next steps as we move forward. And that's dependent upon the information that we hear tonight. If we're able to move forward with the refinement of master plan phasing and cost estimates, we'd like to move forward with that during the rest of June into July, and then have a public in-person presentation with the master plan in late July, and then file the master plan approvals during August would be a targeted time frame. But again, we're here to make sure that we go along this path diligently, and so our time frame is certainly your all's time frame for moving this project forward. So we want to make sure that we get the input needed before we move forward. So with that, I'd like to open up to any kind of questions or input you'd like to provide for, if we start with the concepts itself, if we want to go around and see if there's any questions or input that you'd like to provide for those concepts.
And I'm not being facetious, I'm being serious. And so, did you ask them at all, though, their willingness to pay for this? I mean, it doesn't surprise me that 80% of people say, let's go do this. That's, of course. But did the discussion ever go to, are you willing to pay your taxes to do this? Or are you willing to do without other things? Was there any discussion in the focus group in particular, I guess, about willingness to fund this project? Not that it's not a good project, not that people want it, but did the funding issue come up in the discussion?
We did, during some of the focus group discussions particularly, there was some discussions on implementing the project and what could be partners, what could be priority needs, what were some other sources of funding, sort of getting the appetite of what was out there. But that was also our initial stage to really gather more of the focus on what were people's desires and long-term vision for it, and to see if we're developing a long-range vision for the park site, to make sure that we're thinking really big with that aspect, but then seeing, can we accomplish that within the site, and then ultimately, can we develop a phasing recommendation? It may take a long time, but it could be a phasing recommendation that goes for that full implementation. We, at this time, as we move into the idea, we can certainly, we have the project website. We can have additional surveys where we can ask those types of questions to say, what type of additional funding and how much we could do that. There's actually tools available to budgeting tools that we can have on the website that will address that and gather that input.
Just to kind of follow up on that question, what have you seen from other areas of how they paid for these type of phases?
We've, in the last few years, a lot of communities have moved towards general obligation bonds for these types of improvements. The bond market has certainly been very favorable with rates, and so a lot of communities have done that in the last few years.
Other mechanisms, because we know where we are in general obligation bonds right now.
Yeah, so there's the hotel and restaurant taxes are usually also used if there's potentials here. Again, some of the athletic facilities have the idea that could be additional tournament play and bring in additional revenues to the community. So a number of communities have levied those, and we've seen more competitiveness in the grant side, but we also have permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund at a federal level that is also helping us. We're seeing those funds starting to trickle down to the state level in additional grants being offered. And so what we've been doing here is, because that is competitive, having this broad level of public engagement and having a master plan that really achieves this maximum points within those applications for grants can bring you up to the higher chance of getting some of those grants funding.
You're probably looking at revenue bonds, considering the GFS
That's why you notice when he said GEO, I was like, okay, what other mechanisms? Sorry.
The public engagement results, I mean, so you had 18 people.
For the focus groups.
Focus group.
Yeah.
But I mean, so basically this, okay, so this last chart right here, how many people made up that?
That was at our second event. We had either 25 to 30 folks in the second public meeting.
25 to 30.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to go, your desire is to go from here to a community meeting with the graph like this with 25 or 30 people.
That was for tonight's views.
No, I understand, but I mean, so we're going to go forward.
But 77% of 25 people isn't a whole. That's not a good sample size. It's like,
I mean, I
what he's
worry.
saying, yeah.
I worry about the amount of. I think everybody probably would like this, but I'd like to have more than 25 people say they like it. And I don't know how we put that step in before July 21st, but
I mean, that's on us. That's on us to get people out to look at this, at this plan and this project, and provide, input at a level that we would want. Whatever that number is, either through another round of an online tool looking at these, and or additional rounds of workshops, people coming in and saying that. There's nothing in your data that surprises me, having done hundreds of these over the last 20 years. There's nothing there that surprises me. I think, it makes sense. I think from things that we've heard in the community, a lot of this stuff makes sense. I'm still going to have really, really hard questions and difficult questions that I'm going to want to see data on before we go build $600,000 to $800,000 diamond fields that are only ever diamond fields, that are not used for, not easily used for other things. So I'm going to want to see some strong data, and that's more I'm looking at Jay and staff as well, because the national numbers are going down. I have a pretty strong feeling that some of our growth, or a good portion of our growth in our programs, is from people outside of the area. And I'd like us to do some things in that realm, like work with the school district and see how many kids that attend Clemson Elementary School are taking part in our athletic programs. How many kids from Edwards are taking part in our athletic programs, and see individuals, not just one kid that does everything. We need to know that as well. But I'm going to want to see those numbers before we go into kind of some of the more expensive elements on the plan that are single use elements. I'm way more, as a Parks and Rec person, I like multi-purpose fields, rectangle multi-purpose fields, because you can do a ton of stuff on rectangle multi-purpose fields. But I'm going to want to see some digging into the data there. To answer Fran and Robert and others, we always ask on our needs assessment surveys, we always ask willingness to pay for what you currently have as it currently exists. And then we ask, all right, we've gone through this needs assessment process, we've floated out all these concepts up and above what that original number is that you put. How much more would you be willing to pay? So, recent ones, I'm just looking here. Myrtle Beach, $125 per capita, not, per capita. So, if you're a family of four, this is you time, everybody in your house times four, $125 a year per capita for what they currently had. An additional $120 a year per capita is what they, said they would be willing to pay for that. So, again, you're talking $340 or $240 per person. That's not unusual. I've got a bunch of them sitting up here right now. Mount Pleasant, 156, and an additional 184. Now, Mount Pleasant's one of the most affluent cities that we have in the state. But Fort Mill, $340. This is back a few years ago. This is 2016, 17. Fort Mill wasn't, quite as booming as it is now, and it still was semi-blue collar. $340 for current, and 170 additional. And this is common. Let's see, Lancaster County, $100 and $181 willingness to pay. And I've found this all over the place that, you know, if you look at the per capita willingness to pay, I mean, on the low end, occasionally in places that don't have much, you're getting $50 and $50. But take $50 and multiply it by, let's just go with a conservative estimate of 8,500 non-Clemson students, 10,000 non-Clemson students. On that metric alone, we're underfunding our Parks and Rec on the current by a ton. And I could give you a pretty educated guess. In Clemson, we're going to get good enough. We're going to get somewhere between. I would be surprised if it was below 50, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was over 150 on both of those metrics here. But
So
you know,
Bob,
we
that's
need
good.
to ask.
So when, in your follow-ups, when they actually had to write the check, figure it out, did they do it? I mean, I could easily say 500 more, 300 more, but we know that when the dollars really are
Well, that's the political will of groups like us and engaging the community and getting to that discussion. And yeah, you know, there's some of these that sit on the shelf, but there's a lot of them. I did it the other day, just in the last. I was looking at the facilities that have been developed and how much they were worth and stuff like that. But yeah, they do. They don't do it all because we've got, you know, big plans. This, you know, the sticker shock, but they might do. You might get to 3 or 4 things on this plan, and most places, and y'all will tell us this, if you see that they've done 3 or 4 things, that's pretty common. Sometimes maybe uncommon even. You get to 3 or 4 things, and it takes time to get there. So, like I said, there's nothing in here that, even with low sample size, having done these in places where we've had really good representation, you know, within the community from a demographic, from a diversity standpoint, and even sometimes overrepresented in focus groups, had minority and typically underrepresented groups represented at a much higher level than, you know, what their percentage of the community makeup is. And still, you know, these nothing in here is surprising, and typically you see most of the same things. At your top 5 or 6, you might have one or two kind of different things that are typically different.
Little changes, yeah, they're pretty consistent.
Across the board. So again, from a data standpoint, even though it's a low end, you know, nothing in here makes me uncomfortable outside of what we're seeing in the national numbers with team sports, the travel ball, the highly competitive stuff seems to be driving kids out of those team sports early. And, you know, we are here to serve from youth through really old people, Fran. And you know, focusing on that, while it's important, 5 to 12-year-old time frame that most kids are in youth athletics, that's a very small piece of the lifespan. So I like a lot of the concepts on here, but I'm going to want to see staff and others dig in to what's really going on in our youth athletic program, so we make sure, if we're going to make those investments, that we are making smart investments, and we can talk about, you know, let's see what the market, if it is a market thing and the market's shrinking elsewhere and we're absorbing that the taxpayers that live inside the city, if we're going to subsidize someone, it needs to be them, and if we're going to make money to help do some of these things, it needs to be on the people outside the city that are doing that.
Real quick, what's this?
Let me ask you this real quick. So do you still consider low-hanging fruit such as trails and those types of things?
Oh yeah, I'm 100% a concept B person with looking at the athletic fields maybe a little bit differently. I like concept B a lot. You know, with some tweaks and potentially, you know, based on data and based on us like digging into that data and really thinking about those decisions. The athletic fields are thinking about the scale or numbers and types that we do there. Otherwise I really like concept B.
First of all, you
I'm in Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at the university, and have
Probably
done-
figured that out.
Yeah, yeah.
have done a ton of rec needs assessment, higher level conceptual plans of this because I can't make pretty drawings like you all do, but high level conceptual master plans and strategic plans and those kind of things for a long time now. So I'm going to be a giant pain in your butt probably. You're like, oh God, y'all are all now sitting there like,
No,
oh, this is
that's-
the worst.
And that's what our studio specializes in is park system master planning all the way down to the individual parks. So we're good with.
Yeah, y'all have great reputations. I was excited to see that y'all were.
Other thing I can look at, on the flip side, Bob, I think also, even if the use is, what's like to see the numbers in terms of truck ball, because you can use some of these facilities to host these events, because they have to have them somewhere. And with the tourism we're trying to accomplish, just like when you talk about the swim,
Oh,
the bringing
Clemson
people in.
Aquatics team. I got, by the way,
Aquatics team,
somebody called me out because they were confused when I said cat.
Yeah.
And I said, it's the
Clemson
Clemson Aquatics
Aquatics
team. It's not our cat. It's not our bus system. Sorry.
So just to kind of see how that could also help in terms of investment and also being able to pay why you would need additional fields, because if you don't have the space to host them, then they would go elsewhere. So I do also see that benefit in having additional, not just the local use in terms of our youth, but I'm thankful that other communities want to use it and be a part of our programs because they feel like it's a quality program. And I had Jen say, we still have our sports, but I like how they do it over here, so we signed up over here. So I think that's a good thing, but I think it's also a way to generate revenue for the city, visibility, and actually help with our tournament population, because people stay overnight, they spend lots of money, because if you've ever, when you do these tournaments, folks come and they spend lots of money. Clemson is one of those areas that people want to see more of. Absolutely. So I think that still is a good opportunity to look at it from that perspective as well.
But
So
the data
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
support that, though. When I looked at the data just now, baseball fields were very, very low. They're tied with birding in one of your public comments. So why the focus on baseball fields if the residents, other than the economic?
Oh, no, I was just saying.
But just, unless I'm misinterpreting your data, ball fields did not pop out. And literally on the, the focus was birding, it was tied with baseball fields. And everything else, it's a tiny little bar. So I guess it comes down to the philosophy of what we want to do with this park. But if the intent is to reflect public preference, why ball fields when the data does not support doing that?
Again, the criteria started with the residents' preferences as well and their desires were. But we also, again, factored in several things, including staff input and review of what registrations have been for those programs. And so we want to make sure, we're not paying it just on public input because, again, it was not a statistical survey, so we're not quite sure how that reflects the community and what they, any bias used towards those types of activities. So we wanted to make sure we had a couple other different techniques to gather that input. And so looking at registrations, it definitely, some of the impacts associated with that growth that's occurred is the constraints of getting all the practice times in and then getting the rest for the fields all in there. And the idea, I think concept B is the one that include one additional baseball field and then 2 additional softball or youth fields in that mix. So there's just that limited need for those facilities, not a full wagon wheel of athletic fields like that. And then had the additional of a multi-purpose field that could has 2 U8 or U10 youth sport fields on that, and that would help actually relieve some of the existing diamond sport fields, the lower baseball fields that are used for both use in soccer and baseball in there, so we can have those better quality fields that can help in keeping up, making sure that as those added facilities are in there, that tournament play could be accomplished with the quality of the fields maintained high.
But I understand, but a lot of times demand reflects experience. And so baseball, we do a lot of baseball things. So there's going to be more demand for baseball. But I guess it comes down to philosophy of what the park is for and who's it really designed for. You know, there's very little in this park, if I look quickly, related to arts or culture in the park. I think there might be not exhibits, but a community space. But anyway, but who knows what demand is, because it might be latent because we haven't had that activity available. So I'm not disagreeing with what you just said, but I think that's a philosophical decision about what are the factors that drive it. And so baseball registrations are high, I get that. But maybe other things will be equally in demand if we've been doing them with people who are used to those opportunities. But it's hard to have a demand for something that you've never experienced or you've never perceived as an experience. So, is there an outdoor theater as part of this? Are there things that are different than sport? We are a great sport town. We just are. But maybe we can also be a great cultural arts town. I don't want to say the word too loud, but a control idea. But my point being, if public demand or public expectation, the results of that is which drives this, baseball feels really low. If it's economics and Jay and Tony's profession, it's demand because the number of people signing up is so high, well, that's fine. But then if you come back to Bob's point, if that's driven primarily by out-of-town people, if they're the ones that expand it so much, then it's not responsive to the city. Yeah, Lucia point's well taken. Baseball tournaments make money. We certainly like to make money. Bob said no, we can do more. No, my point being, I'm just a little surprised that ball fields are low in demand, but you said one or two fields. Looks like 20 or 30% of the space might be some kind of ball fields. I agree with Bob on the rectangular fields where we have multiple purposes. But anyway, it was just an interesting dichotomy between, you started by talking about the job that was based on public input, but then the decision, a lot of that part of it was contrary, I think it's fair to say, not contrary, was not part of public preference.
Yeah, 'cause
I
I
think
was
it's interesting though, when you look at, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I said, to your point, looking at the same data, I know I've heard from a lot of people about pickleball. It's behind very on this list.
Right.
Soccer, I hear, is a growing sport, but the dislikes doubled the likes for
Yeah,
soccer.
so
So I don't know how you weigh all that. I don't know if it's getting it in there, but
Well, I think
But
the
fall soccer's a huge, it is a growth there. I mean, the fall baseball did well, when it was added, but, or whatever, and those kind of things, fall soccer grew, but again, I'm gonna want to, they've got both.
dislikes a little higher than likes for
Yeah.
soccer.
But national data, lots of those things are going off. Pickleball,
I think my
crazy
point is
growing,
about
lacrosse,
marriage.
some things like that. You've got lots of sports that are growing at a higher rate, and most of the sports that are growing at a higher rate are either individual or they're more rectangle sport fields are growing at a higher rate. I'm going to disagree with Alicia a little bit. If we wanted to, really get into the sport tourism game, we're not even close, and that's like getting into trying, Dabo and Dabo land and trying to keep up with football recruiting, because guess what? Everyone else is doing it, and like I said, nothing against this
Highly
plan,
competitive.
but this plan is not a drive sport tourism, have a great facility that's going to bring in giant tournaments and stuff like that at the level where you will actually get to where the economic impacts are significant, and we'll feel it in our hospitality and accommodations tax. You'll get a little bit, but it's going to be it's going to be negligible, and we're not going to notice the additional revenue like a Spartanburg County with the baseball facility.
Well, no, that's why I was asking
Yeah.
if there's a way to get information about what that could look like, especially if we had an addition. Because we don't necessarily know, we're just speculating. So it would be helpful to have that information to see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not speculating because I do the economic impact reports for a ton of the sports facilities
So you
around
have it-
the state.
So you have it for Clemson?
Yeah, I don't have it for Clemson, but I have it for other facilities, so I can tell you the scale of the type of facility it takes. And the type, I could tell you for this type of facility, this number of fields. And Clemson, tomorrow I could pull you together numbers of what it potentially generate, and that's, you know, if we can get the tournaments to come, if they don't decide to go to Greenville or Spartanburg County or
Don't we-
Rock Hill
don't
or
we do
Myrtle
tournaments
Beach or
here?
anything else. We do have some, and it's good, yeah.
Yeah.
It's competitive.
Jay, what are we lacking to reach that next level to get additional tournaments?
These new fields on the concepts are multi-use baseball or softball. Now you have two grass infields that can only be used for baseball, and then the one girls, and then the two at the bottom of that, when it rains, they get wet. So this would add 3 fields for multi-use, either baseball or softball. And would help us alleviate the complaints we get for having late practices also. That's the biggest complaint that I get is a 10-year-old or having practice from 7 to 8 on Thursday. And like what Bob said, now you use the outfields of 3 of the baseball, softball fields play soccer. Now,
And then that becomes a maintenance problem, you know,
Right,
because
yeah.
you're beating up your diamond fields, you know, more as well. So
Right.
it's all a balancing act, and it's hard. Yeah.
I mean, we're
And that's what we were seeking to with that phase 1 recommendations were to balance that, the need for the adjustments with the athletic components. Again, that, in some cases, that is not the absolute highest priorities, but had some functionality issues with the existing and being able to realize their full potential by having some of those additional facilities, but then balancing that again from what we heard from the public to have that passive and active recreation components at Nettles Park. So the whole concept B really drove out of that idea, really would be to highlight that eastern side of the expansion areas with all those adventure and passive uses on the site to really have that balanced experience for Nettles.
Yeah, I wanted to add real quick too, that keep in mind the phasing of this. So, you know, even if we have to dial back the phasing for budget constraints, you're probably talking about 1 to 2 fields in that initial phase. And so you will see, you know, however many years, 2 to 3, whatever that may be, it takes to get that, you'll see that trend, at least localized, and whether or not you recognize, you know, the fee for residents versus non-residents and try to recoup some dollars there. But, and we could look at, you can see when we study a little bit more, if it's multi-purpose rectangular fields, they're not usually interchangeable, but for the most part, where you have 2 diamonds, we could probably fit some size of rectangular field. So if your first phase was there's a greater emphasis for soccer or rectangular field, that could probably be interchanged with maybe the diamonds being where the multi-purpose is in a later phase there too. So it gives you a little bit more time and flexibility to see where the trends go. At least gets you kind of off square one with the park and get some of the infrastructure, at least get you into that area where you can continue to grow and reevaluate. As Nick said, you know, 3 to 5 years, probably after you get these first initial phase or 2 done, you may have a whole different need there. And so the one consideration that we haven't really talked about is we felt like Nettles was the place to put this type of active recreation athletic fields, because it's not often you get this much land. They take up a sizable amount of property, and you've got that already. The other thing to consider is this is where you have kind of your critical mass in the athletic fields already, and your maintenance facilities. So there's basically, this is the best place to put them. If you feel like in the future, or you need some additional fields, you've got your maintenance facility there. you've got property, whereas some other amenities that are on a smaller scale you can often put in smaller parks. You really can't force 2 baseball fields or 2 soccer fields in a small area. But you've got all your these are the most maintenance intensive amenities you have, and you've got your maintenance there. So from efficiency, that's going to certainly help you. If that leads to tournaments, having all your fields in one location, whether it's maybe a more regional tournament, like you're not maybe attract everybody to Myrtle Beach, but you at least have enough fields to host some smaller tournament. And even small tournaments, small swim meets, small activities, they do bring people who stay overnight and eat in restaurants. It may not be a big on a budget compared to a football game here, but it's something.
We have the hotel rooms and infrastructure to host a good 300 to 500 person event. We can do that very well. So that's not a Rock Hill type of facilities type of thing. But you've got about $317,500 a year in predictable money that can go towards this. In this year's budget, I've already put $267.5 towards implementation of this plan. That I just added the parkland money, which is about $50,000 a year. So you're at about $320 available a year to throw at the implementation of this part. And I was listening to your diversity concerns earlier. What would you all think about? We wouldn't even need the consultants to do this. We could do this on the staff level. We could take these handouts and the boards. We could go to different locations in town. Like one would be the depot, hit the Calhoun area. One would be Little John for Abel and Vista. One could be Clemson Elementary School. One would be the Calhoun Bridge Center. Like we did the town halls, and then we can just get people's feedback on the plan itself and just what their desires are.
So I'm going to chime in. I think that's great. But I'm going to chime in. I guess I love having a long-term plan. I've been saying that for years. Everybody knows here on council. I think when we present that vision, when we put all this out there, people are thinking it's going to be next year or in the next few months. And that's the concern for me, and I won't speak for anybody else up here. I think this is great. If I had to pick it, I'm going to answer your question. It's concept A. So I would answer your question, concept B. I would love to share this. I think it's great to share because it shows where we get to. I think we also need to have it. This is not for Kimley Horn and our mayor back there, Blake. It's more for the community to say, how can we get there? What is our willingness to pay? And then also be realistic about how this will have to be in micro phases and what we envision year 1, year 2, year 3. Because I get a little concerned because I love how we start. This is great. But you got to scale it down and say, what's realistic? We're going to get there. This is how we're going to get there. Does that make sense? I'm not saying it. If we do the town halls, that's what I would make sure that we're articulating that very well.
I would think we would want to do it like we did the ask questions first without giving them a plan, so to speak, because you're not giving them a thought process that they're expecting all this up front, but just to kind of get some input. So whatever questions we use, whatever survey we use, I think that's the way to actually get that feedback, because I'm sure, because I still have the concerns that John had, you got 25 to 30 people, so we don't really know who all of these folks are, so there may be other interests that we're missing. And I think if it's better probably without going with this plan, because we know this is what you all have come up with, but maybe some of those questions you asked, either from the survey perspective or the focus group, to say, we're looking into this master plan, what are some of your thoughts? And that'll probably be the best way to go about it, so that there's not an expectation already, but we're hearing your thoughts.
And you'll find out how representative the original study was, if it matches up. But we're able to go out into the community now.
Right.
But if we would need to make sure, like for example, to get at what Alicia is asking is that, if we had them look at, went to the survey, we tried to do some targeting survey to make sure that we get, African American residents, Hispanic residents, Asian residents, and have them fill out the survey and ground truth what we found here, add it into the data pile, and just have to trust people and say, yeah, I didn't fill out the original survey, so we could get some level of representation and see, if it changes the overall results, if there's differences in the results, if that's a step that we wanted to do to be sure that we're reaching everyone on the front end before we move forward with a concept and a phasing plan on this. And it may change some of this. I don't know that it's going to change it a ton, but I think if we decide that that's what we want to do, that would be the way to do it.
So I think that is kind of a microset, what you're talking about. I think that's good, and it gets there. So just for the sake of what I'm about to say, let's assume it comes back and it validates everything. There's no big change. Kind of tying into what Robert was doing, and I don't know how hard this would be, is you put, let's just say we're at the next meeting after that, and we do have the drawings, is let's put some real numbers and timelines with it, not just tell them it's long term, not just that, but I mean, let's have your big map, but let's break it down and just, personally, I think there might need to be some more bite-sized phases than what's out there. Phase one, maybe a little bit smaller, a little more passive. All this saying, I'm kind of a concept big guy, because if nothing else, I like the green space not being taken up by the parking. There was a lot more of that in phase A's, and concept A did not realize, but yeah, I mean, just kind of echo what y'all said. Let's get your interim step validated, but to Robert's point, but just take that a step further, and then it would be from a budgeting side, just showing people real tax dollars of what we have right now, and if we threw 80% of that, so we kept a little bit of reserve back, it would fund this much money over 10 or 15 years, and that's going to pay for this component of phase one or micro phase one. So just to what the data Bob was talking about now, if you want that to go up, you're going to have to pay this. I like real numbers. I mean, I think this stuff's pretty, and I think talking about it generally, but I mean, at some point, I just think somebody needs to tell me what my house payment is.
And just for Kimberly Horn's sake, and Blake back there, we acknowledge economies of scale that it would be better to do this all at once. We realize that it would save us a tremendous amount, but we have to be realistic of what we have financially. And Andy's the guru as well as Leslie from the finance side. So
It's kind of sobering to think that if this amount of cash you have annually, that's $4 million over 50.
I know.
Yeah.
So that's
I
why
was
I'm
kind of
saying.
thinking through some of that.
It's
And that's why I like showing it with the numbers.
Yes.
Taking the big thing, breaking it down, and then putting where we are now.
I mean, right now, phase one, we would have to take our entire accommodations, hospitality tax fund and dedicate it all to that. We don't have a millage cap on that, or a debt cap on that. We could go out, we could borrow all the money based on, our $2 million a year in special tax collections, and we could go out and borrow all the money, and we could do it. But then everything else that we're funding with that right now, we got to find another way to fund, the police portion of that, the roads and landscaping portion, the events and other things in Parks and Rec. We're going to have to go back in and we're going to have to find $1 million, somewhere else. But that's the scale we're talking about. I think we also need to get back and get to this in the discussion for you all, but we got to go back, and this is on my list of things, is that we need to do our impact fee study, and we need to think about getting our impact fees right, because if we had been more thoughtful about impact fees, we would have a bucket of cash available for this right now with the development that has occurred over the last 5 to 7 years here. We would have had we missed a giant opportunity as a community there with our impact fees. Because Parks and Rec is one of the components that you can include. And we have a small Parks and Rec fund that comes from impact fees, but again, now we have a $20 to $25 million plan for one of a number of parks that we're talking about that we can use as part of our study and adjustment and need to show that we need
because
to.
of the way you have to spend the money and the time limits on it. If you have a plan like this, I mean, you have an opportunity to really raise it. Where before you raise it, but we might have to give it back. We couldn't find a way to spend it.
So let me go back to something. So to think if we're going to try to get representative responses, I think we need to expand what that means. The fastest growing population in our city is probably people over 65.
the pickleball crowd, if you will. So I'm going to know more about it. There's certainly evidence in the literature that some ethnic groups use parks differently than other ethnic groups. Some ethnic groups really use parks for large family functions. It becomes their backyard, essentially. My guess is that didn't come out in this result. So I think the attempt for representation needs to be comprehensive. And I think it also has to be future-looking. I mean, what Clemson looks like today very well may not be the ethnic, racial, aging population of the future. I'll tell you a group that's least served in Clemson, from what I hear, are single adult males who don't do very well in this town. They go to Greenville. But I guess, so I think in this sense of looking for the right profile, expand that to include all those age groups. Families without children are very different than families with children. So I think it's great to try to get that profile, but that's not 25 people, that's lots of people. But let me go back to the point though. If we're not going to then put heavy credibility or weight on what they want to do, if we're still going to go back to baseball fields, I don't want to raise people's hopes that there's more to this than there is. So I think there has to be a commitment that data will drive the decision making, at least partly. And if baseball and softball keep coming down at the very bottom, we have to have a talk with Jay and the recreation department. What does that mean in terms of the way we want to go with this? So I think I like the idea of expanding the base and the responses, but I think it's got to be truly representative. It's very easy to find demographics of the city, and does the response rate meet that? My guess is in-house you have professionals who do those kinds of things, but I think it also has to be focused on what Clemson's going to look like in the future. We have the big gorilla, which are 25,000 students. Do they make up a large user group of this park? Jay's saying yes. Well, they're probably going to want something very different. They probably will want some fields, but I don't know if they were part of your data gathering at all. How many were students were.
Yeah, that's a complete other discussion, is the university abdicating their
we don't want
their responsibility to serve the students.
But I'm just saying, I
needs.
think if we're going to disaggregate the data eventually, that the subgroups have to be appropriately represented and not focus on people like me or anyone else. That we have to be careful. But that makes the assumption that data is going to help drive the decision making, even if it comes up differently.
So that's why I really think the idea of, if we can get with the school system and we can look at the number of kids that are in our schools that live in the city of Clemson and that are participating in our programs, I think we're going to find that, let's say there's 900 kids at Clemson Elementary. How many of those 900 kids currently participate in athletic programs as opposed to summer camp, and how many of them are crossovers, and how many kids we're not serving, and think about what we're doing there, as well as across the lifespan. And that's one thing, I like both, there's things in both concepts, but there's things here: trails, greenways, open, passive space that people can choose to use in different ways. And there's some elements in there that, families, big event space, and casual space as well,
And I would add Central, because we have an agreement with Central, because a lot of, if we talk about Ellis, that's Central, Clemson, even 6 now. But Central students or use our programs.
Yeah, they use, but we need to know who lives in the city and who doesn't.
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is, because we use, it's a joint agreement, it's a partnership, so.
On certain things. It's not a partnership on everything. It's a partnership on certain
That's what I'm
programs.
asking.
Yeah, certain programs. So that's what we need to
Is it
consider.
with baseball, softball? There's a partnership.
Spring sports and,
In football too, right? Okay.
spring baseball, softball, and,
Basketball?
basketball.
So we have, real quickly for you, we have,
I want to make sure that Kennedy's questions are being
yeah,
answered.
we will. So we have a stopping point at 8 o'clock, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. And so whatever action items, I want to make sure Kimley Horn and Blake over there, you have, enough feedback from us on guidance going forward and the next steps. So I know you want to go over Carrie's, but I just want to make sure we got 20 minutes.
Did you get these questions
Keep
from
on track.
the chair of the Rec Advisory Committee, Carrie Corson? Okay,
So,
I did forward that to you.
so
yes.
have you addressed these with her, with the committee, or do you want to answer them tonight? Or do you want to do it?
As soon as we've touched on,
There's 5 or 6 questions.
as soon as we've touched on tonight too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and,
So I'll answer real quickly, Fran, some of them. So yes, we have talked about the
Yeah.
phasing, the micro phasing, and then we just talked about the financial. We were just talking about the second demand of financially sound plan.
Right.
Public feedback was comprehensive enough. I think we really did cover that very well
Right.
earlier. And the needs and implementation of this plan in the context of all parts, and that goes back to the master plan that's expired as of 2018. That we would need to talk
Well, the
about.
master plan, but also the point from the ball fields, I thought it was well taken.
Yes.
That this is your critical mass. Yes, I feel like we touched that pretty good.
And then the budget for maintenance and staffing, and Tony is here, that is a conscientious item, I know from me, I know from everybody up here about, this is great to have all these capital projects, but we gotta make sure they're maintained quality, and they have the team, and Andy works with us.
Yeah, this comes with a doubling of staff in our maintenance
cloning
operations
Tony.
side of things, at least. And we already need some of that anyway, but this in and of itself puts a massive strain on Tony and.
Which I think that's part of that budget thing, when you show people when
Tommy
they go to these
and that
groups.
group. This is a big
Might
deal.
need to move on lower too.
The scissors wore out.
Need somebody to ride it.
That's
So Nick, do you
3.5 years
do you
when I
wanna-
retire,
do you
I'll
wanna-
be out there for
Nick,
it.
do you wanna bring us home and just?
Yeah.
Okay. Based
And-
on what you're hearing from us.
and I'll just, with the operations and maintenance costs, one of the things with the master plan, as we move forward with the development of a single master plan recommendation, is to look at the operations and maintenance as it's across the phasing, so we know when those O&M costs would be hitting with each phase tied to what's being developed in there on that. So what we're hearing is, I think, a rather broad support on concept B, with some maybe ideas, some comments or adjustments to that, so that I think it allows us to start to move to a direction of a plan. And then what we're hearing is, as part of the phasing, is to look at smaller phases and maybe some of those micro phasing type elements, both sort of at the beginning, but also as part of that phasing discussion is to get a broader input from the community in terms of that phasing and incorporating that data into that those phasing recommendations, and then to present that information so that the public understands and sets its expectations of what the phasing would be tied to an actual recommended timeline as well. So is that capturing the consensus right now?
I would say, and this may have been mentioned in there, I'm sorry, there's a lot we've been pulling in, but in your phasing, like, to me, any phase one ought to include clearing natural trails through the entire thing and connectivity. I mean, even they get roughed over, moved over the last time, but whenever you turn the dirt for phase one, it includes the fact that you can utilize the entire property, walking and biking.
The idea, especially with the trails, is that could be an easy microphase to begin with to activate the space, while maybe a larger phase is being developed over a period of years. It's really easy to put in unpaved trails, and then at a later point, they may become then paved trails. So stuff like that could be easily incorporated.
But when we land on a concept, some of those things, like, I know there's going to be things that we don't want to face, like the big moving of land, getting the loop road in, all of those kind of things. They're going to be high dollar items, because if you try to phase those, then you're going to end up spending 5 times as much to do them over time. So there's going to be some things about getting the site right and getting the site ready that we'll need to do in the bigger part of phase.
But I think this is just, to John's point, is really being able to use the park in a passive way, as immediate as possible. I mean, that would be a great opportunity. I mean, the times I walked out there, it's so quiet, it's awesome.
I mean, we need to decide.
All emphasized.
Part of me doesn't want it to change.
Well, I know. But you got to have the trail.
But I mean, we need to demonstrate to the public, what we're going to, at some beginning. I think there needs to be some utilization, and the trails is, in my opinion, a low hanging fruit.
Correct. Thank you.
One of the items to note for the site preparation and infrastructure is one thing that drives that for both concepts is a lot of the infrastructure is coming from the central side of the site, and so as developing any of the facilities deeper into the site, running the utilities, everything back into those certainly drives a lot of those costs. And that was part of what we were looking at with phasing. We want to consider that going forward as well. What types of items, and it may result in where even consideration of something that's being temporarily located closer to central because that's where the utilities are coming in, and then maybe a long-term relocation as that facility needs to be replaced deeper into the site or location that can take advantage of other resources there.
You can also do gravel parking lots very well, and you can do just the ball field without the lighting. That would save you a ton of money. And we've had good success having Pickens County fund lighting for ball fields. We've done that before.
Use what's been done in Central, Southern West End. That's gravel right now, is it not, the parking lot?
Which one?
The one for the bike
Yes,
trail.
it is.
It's gravel, but it's being used
It's
tremendously.
I go there all the time. It's perfectly fine.
And that's what I would envision personally. But anyways,
Yeah, I think we can look at taking some of these phases into smaller pieces. I do acknowledge that some of this infrastructure up front, it's heavily, it's very front loaded. I mean, water and sewer and just is what it is. But ultimately, we need to get some park amenities in these first phases. Nobody's going to accept spending whatever dollars there are to get a water line. It's just not real attractive, but it is something you're going to have. So we did discuss, lighting's an easy one, pavement, gravel, smaller pieces. What I'd like for us to do, and we will do in advance of our next public meetings, we'll drill down a little bit tighter in some of these phases. So 1A, B, C, whatever makes sense. There's some logical stopping points where we can look at doing that and come back with those numbers, and then perhaps we can work with Andy on. I think I heard something about what's a theoretical timeline. Is phase one a 1 year? Without putting dates to anything, you decide when you start that. But when you decide what that is, and is this a 10-year plan? I think we can. Aside from the financing, what we can tell you is, if you end up with 6 or 7 phases on this, and this is a 10-year master plan, assuming you keep going, but we can try to work out something. And to your point, question about your willingness to pay, I think that can be a question. You want this in 10 years, or you want this in 15 years? Because maybe there's a way to come up with some high level of ballpark of what that would cost. To your point, what's your willingness to fund this?
I'm hearing 20, 25 years with the numbers out there and what we can service in debt.
It's only another 20, 25 million on top of everything.
That's
else.
what I'm saying.
Okay.
We got to grow our tax
It's
base
really
and not
not that-
restrict it so much.
You could, if you did it through millage, you would just use it through Parkland Fund and just pay go.
We're gonna have to just look at a lot of different options, a lot of different sources, a lot of different ways to think about it.
When we do the signing sheets, when we go on our, we'll create it so people can voluntarily give us demographic information. And we'll compile it anonymously, so you should get a good feel of what we're looking at. And if the next public meeting, we might want to have that Little John, because they've got a brand new facility.
It might not. So, but it might also not be a bad idea to go to some places where people are already, like 12 Mile Beach or other park areas, and talk to current users who are coming to their parks, not all city residents, but, or when there's a particularly busy date at one park. So 12 Mile Beach would be a nice access to some populations that may not come to your sure.
3,500 a weekend? Is that how many people?
Are we having our first?
We've done similar where we've gone out in the community. I mean, often we try and host it near the facility because that's representing who's using it. But if you have other facilities you're trying to get a broader cross section of the city, it's certainly a good aspect. When we've gone to farmers market, we've gone to when we've done fields, we go on Saturday. So when they're actually using the athletic fields, and you ask the people who are participating what they want.
We're only 7.25 square miles, so I think the whole community's accessing it.
Yeah.
Because the other thing we was talking about, I'm sorry. But Juneteenth would be a good place to maybe bring
Yeah, I was
some-
thinking that too. That's a great
Juneteenth,
idea.
the open house for Lil John, and then we're having our city council, coffee with council, what do we call it?
Conversation.
Conversation with council would be another opportunity.
And there's an event, it'll be it's too quick for us, but Saturday, we got two community events, one at Nettles and one at, in Central. Shaq's doing one.
Oh, that's
and,
right, that's right.
Bradley Pinion, am I pronouncing it? Current NFL players giving out the community, which is awesome, but if we had it, that would be great, but I know that's 2 days from now. We normally have events like that, so that's what we were blessed.
Juneteenth might be better. I mean, there's going to be,
At Little John.
it's going to be a swarm around the Bradley Shack camps. They're not going to be paying attention to anything else.
It's supposed to be
It's going to be hard to grab attention.
That's a community get back, which they're very.
Yeah, they just got free food.
Thank y'all all for being here. We got 5 more minutes unless you want to, we'll close it out early. We appreciate you being here on a Thursday evening. Any closing?
No, we appreciate the time, and we'll work with Jay and Andy on trying to refine what this approach looks like for the next part of public engagement, and that's all we have for this evening.
What office do y'all work in? Are you in? What city are you in?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
You're in Raleigh. Y'all in Raleigh. Are you staying in Clemson tonight?
Adam?
Just wanted to make sure. Just wanted to make sure.
And we all stayed in Clemson when we came for the last one.
I made that mistake one time. One time.